We have an interesting session planned for you. This year, CSR box became CSR and ESG box, which is great. We're going to add another 3 acronyms and say, how do we make it from ESG to SDGs, right? It's something, and I sort of did a quick hand turn before to ask how many folks are from the sustainability teams, and also how many are funders, how many are CSR. There's a good mix in this room right now. You have a lot of experiences. Our objective today is to help you understand the opportunity that you have of riding the ESG wave to really make a meaningful difference on the SDGs, right, and the goals that we have as a country, and the world, rather. So that's what we'll do today. Do you mind tracking it? Okay, cool. That's us. You met us, so that's fine. Let's do a show of hands again, okay? There is a school of thought which believes ESG is dead. There's a school of thought which believes, actually it's a new way of working. Can you just do a show of hands, how many people for the first camp? It's okay for you to raise your hand if you believe that. Interesting. So are all of you the second camp? Okay, that's great. Okay, so, sorry, say that again? Still not dead, but it's dying. Okay, thank you for saying that. And so there is one skeptic in the group, which is good. Keep us honest, ask us tough questions, yeah? I also have to say, before we jump into this, that I'll take maybe 30 seconds to introduce Dalberg to you, and then we'll sort of jump into it. So Dalberg is a global management consulting firm, over 20 years old, and we have a global footprint. We're the largest firm that only works on social impact issues. And I have to say, I'm probably was a camp that ESG is just compliance and regulatory pressure, and we at Dalberg only speak the language of SDGs, right? However, in the last couple of years, I would call myself a convert, because I'm seeing what kind of sustainability efforts corporates are driving, funders are putting money, and I'm seeing a path of using that momentum to drive SDGs. So which is why I'm standing here along with my colleague Richa. She has far more technical experience than I have in this space, so I'll let her come in once I've sort of set up the stage a little. The thing that I also want to reach out is, while we've called this a masterclass, I don't think anybody is a master at it. We still are learning. So please do feel free to interject, raise a point of view, share some questions as we go along. You said the energy level is low, so let's bring it up. Let's make it an interactive discussion versus a one-way share out of what we know or what we are thinking about. Yeah? So we're going to move on. What we will do is, one, raise the ambition on ESGs. Let's see, sir, if you're able to convert you by the end. Yeah? So we'll see if you're able to do that. And lay the path to SDGs. Second, we really want to deep dive with you, why are companies not doing this enough, right? Why is there there is a silo box. We all probably know that coming into this. What are the challenges they face? I want to share with you a lot of examples. There's no better way of learning from some examples, so we'll share that. And then we'll also give you some tools that you can think about as you start, if you decide to start navigating and using your ESG strategies towards SDGs. Like, what are some tools to use? This is not a technical discussion on ESG. We are not going to talk about materiality, double or single or whatsoever. We're not going to talk about ratings. We are not going to talk about how to score your company. That's not us, actually. We are a strategic advisor and not a technical sort of aspect. We know it, but we don't want to talk about that today. Yeah? Cool. I'm going to start here. Before I start with ESG, I want to sort of make you reflect on why businesses have no choice for them to lead in the next decade. They have to drive SDGs. Any show of hands, like why I'm so emphatic about it, like, and if you believe in it, like why might businesses need to do that? Yeah.
I think SDGs affect people and people work for businesses. So if businesses are not taking care of SDGs, they're not taking care of the people.
Yeah, and people could be your customers, your workers, your
Sure.
employees, all
Yes.
of that. Anybody else?
So, in my opinion, it has to do a lot with accountability. We know that most of environmental problems in the world, you could say 10% are individual based and 90% of them are corporation based. So it's about, in some way or the other, making right of the wrongs,
Thank you.
perhaps. That is maybe a crude way of putting it, but
Yeah. I would phrase it slightly differently, what you said. Yes, they are accountable, but also businesses, like put yourself in the business shoe, right? Like I ran a, like both of us have been in private sector for decades before we moved to this space. It's okay, so what if I'm accountable? But when it starts affecting the business, is when they say, oh, well, I have no choice but to deal with it, right? So I think it's a little bit of a slightly different framing from what you said. Okay, one more input, go on.
So there are tangible impacts that business make in the economy, and then there are intangible or non-financial impact that business make in terms of long-term customer retention,
Yeah.
or the kind of loyalty they are building
Yeah.
to customers. So ESG for the business is important because it's bringing not only the monetary value but also the long-term value in terms of growth and impact that they are doing.
Fantastic, thank you. You've sort of said some of the points that I was hoping to, and I will cover. Sorry, sir, I'll take one last, yeah, and then I'm going to move on.
As everyone said, now a company, client as well as people,
Okay.
they select company how ESG we are actually, right? Otherwise they don't agree. Yes, when I hiring the employees, they also look how much we are able to really
Yeah.
focusing on ESG. Same thing client. Each and every RFP, we have a ESG.
Yeah, so it's a need, right? Like there is no running away from it. Okay, I'm going to move to the next. I think I have much of these points here, but I'll just do a quick voiceover. See, businesses today are facing a very different environment, right? Which are both challenges and opportunities. You're facing, let me start with something that I heard, right? You're facing demand from consumers who are saying, you need to serve me also, right? Like, sorry, I was speaking to, where they're doing work on creating a platform for persons with disability. It's a business need. It's no longer a choice, right? Economic uncertainty. There's so much variability now with consumer spending, consumer confidence. Investors are asking for it, right? You spoke about RFPs. Try raising any loan, any credit. Investors are asking for you for it, right? When you think about grander scheme, businesses that are international, geopolitical effects are affecting you, and unless you focus on SDGs, and this is, remember, I'm still making you think about SDGs. You will have trade disruptions, supply chain disruptions. You have no choice but to think about SDGs, which is the pathway to strengthen yourself in your businesses and reduce some of these risks. We spoke about climate, right? So it is the biggest. Don't forget opportunities like AI. AI on one side is a threat, but AI is a fantastic opportunity too. I'm sure today there must be sessions on AI in this conference too, right? The short of it is, as a business who is, whether you're a sustainability team, CSR teams, you're a funder, you need to think about what and how you can impact SDGs because it impacts you back. There's no longer an open loop. The loop comes back to you, right? So I think it's important to recognize that. If you move forward, and this is now I'm going to start trying to stitch it to ESG. Thank you, Richa. We believe, and this is, like I said, it's a hypothesis today, and it's like we're no masters at it, right? This is our thinking, that ESG is a pathway to address some of these challenges and fuel sustainable, resilient, inclusive growth. You will see those three words practically in all SDGs. Right? But they are very powerful words, right? Like what they mean by. How? And I think, ma'am, you spoke a little bit about this, right? And many of you are doing this, risk mitigation is the forefront. ESG is largely driven by risk and regulatory and compliance. But this is not just, your investor asking you to do this, or the regulators, BRSR asking you to do this. Globally also, you're starting to feel this pressure with like a CBAM, right, which is asking you to do that carbon, cross-border carbon pricing. Let's think at the opportunity level. When you think and when you work, for ESG leaders, I was surprised by it when sort of we looked at this data. At average, the leaders have a higher annual rate of return versus the laggards, right? So it's good business. Why wouldn't you do it? And many of you spoke about, right, allows you to sort of lower your cost of operations, attract more talent, retain more talent. The other bit is you can drive new business models. A lot of us know that, right? Like with small sachets that you see companies do, powdered liquids, powdered hand washes, EV, these are all new businesses that have come out the back of this. You can shape markets, especially with larger organizations, you can really shape supply chains and markets. Capital, it's a no given. And more investors are going to ask you for ESG compliance. And it gives you an edge, whether you get a concessional debt or whether you get access to it, whether you get, so this is a norm that's going to shift. I think, again, somebody spoke about this reputation point, right? As employers, you need to differentiate yourself. As companies, as, Sir spoke about, when he said so many stakeholders, you need to differentiate yourself. Reputation is very important, right? So all of these factors are playing. I'll take some quick examples and then turn. We've chosen some Indian companies and some mix. Aditya Birla does this internal carbon pricing, where if they see something is going to have a material impact on emissions, they do an internal carbon pricing, so that they're then able to reduce the risk of carbon taxation because of CBAM. So many organizations, HUL, Godrej, etc., have really innovated on the product itself and driven different markets, right? We all know what's happening in EV. The entire supply chain, from components to battery manufacturers to storage to OEMs, everything, entire supply chains have been created. A lot of capital flowing after it. You can see the examples here, right? And I'm sure many of you know Patagonia as a company, right? Like, it is really reputed. Like, you would pay $500 for that jacket, right? Because it's such a reputed brand for all the right reasons, right? So, yeah. Cool. Now let's move to the link to SDGs. This is dense. I'll voice over so that you get a flavor for it. And Richa, please do come in with more examples, right, as you go along. Any of you from the agri sector here? Food, beverage, right? So you probably have seen this, right? Like, there's such concerted effort being put in agriculture, where the activities, especially through the ESG, are definitely impacting the emissions. But in agriculture, when mitigation and adaptation actually straddle the same layer, right? You work on with the farmer to increase productivity. It builds their resilience, adaptation, but that also actually has some backward impact on emissions also. Right? So much happening here. ITC is spending so much money. Specific activities also in deforestation, Unilever is doing. Kind of crops that you're focusing on, millet-based, a lot of different technologies for circularity being used. All of these tie back to those big ass like SDG 7, right? Everything is going to tie back to that. And I'm sure many sustainability leads, I'm just going to give you a pause. How many of you have net zero kind of goals, especially the sustainability team leads here, right? Yeah, so many of you have that, right? You're already driving that. The trick there, as you sort of widen your thinking, move beyond mitigation, also start covering adaptation activities, because the key word was inclusive, resilient for all. Think about all the marginal users in your supply chain. In agriculture, it's smallholder farmers. Think about them too, right? What does it need? So you will start doing different things. And that's when your ESG money will be truly driving broader set of SDGs. Let's look at the women empowerment, right? Again, so much effort happening on DEI with a special focus on gender representation in companies. And you know that how margins are better, and this, we've sort of taken some examples of manufacturing, but across sectors, like this data is there, right? So many companies are doing this. Direct tagged to SDG 5, and then many others linked. There are others which are not actually that front and center for many sustainability teams, but they are getting traction in the ESG planning, especially on biodiversity and circularity. I'll actually invite Richa here. She's a chapter guide to speak. But I just want to sort of use this before I hand over to Richa to say that what you're doing today in various ESG initiatives, can you start expanding the canvas to try to see what are all the SDGs I can impact through it? And how do I do it in a way that I really make it inclusive and resilient? So not just think about now and here emissions which everybody is getting a stick for, but like also adaptation, also marginalized communities and sort of, areas like that. Yeah, cool. Rich, I'm going to pass to you. I'm just finding am I audible to everybody? More comfortable with everyone. All right, perfect. More conversation. Oh, sorry. All right, my bad. I hope I'm audible for the camera now. Thank you. Thanks, Shruti. So, yeah, like Shruti mentioned, biodiversity, circularity, sub-parts of what we broadly think of as sustainable measures is something that's not picked up, that did not pick up until the recent years. But when we look at the kind of accelerated efforts on circularity, we already are one of the largest EPR-driven countries in the world. Our EPR regulations are strongest, and we see that being translated. That's compliance. I don't count that. What I will count is the efforts that companies like Arvind Mills are putting in. Arvind Mills went ahead of regulation, looked at it as an opportunity. They tied up with a company called Purefy, and they've looked at how can we actually recycle blended fabrics up to 95% cotton, 5% blends, and make denims out of it. They've transformed and created a new business vertical that's driven on circularity. That's a company in India. I'm not even talking about what Renault has done globally. So there is a lot of action, but the moment and the difference between the two, the moment when you think about what FMCG companies are doing with circularity in their packaging versus when you look at what these companies are doing, what Arvind Mills is doing and what Grasim is doing in terms of circularity in textiles, the difference is compliance versus opportunity. And the way that they've thought about the bigger impact and moving beyond looking at just risk mitigation from ESG. I'm going to ask you, just again pause here, right? Have any of you sort of been doing any of these strategies? Anybody wants to share an example or two? And like, our hypothesis is difficult, and companies are not able to do it a lot. So we just want to ask your experience, and then we'll delve into our thinking. Your experience and why is ESG difficult for you or your organization to achieve? What were the challenges that you faced? Yeah, go on.
Yeah, so we are working with quite a few corporates and like on ESG also, sustainability funding apart from CSR. So one thing is like water positive solutions. So that is one thing that they are looking at, especially the PSUs and those companies which are extracting water. And second is also there is net zero or carbon neutrality. And one kind of challenge we are facing in carbon offsetting, or that is the calculation of sequestered carbon and those type of emission reduction methodologies. So quantification and sharing with them the impact. So that is one area.
I'm going to expand the question. It's not just about challenges in ESG. What are the challenges in using the ESG strategy to really catalyze SDGs, right? Just share the questions.
Yeah, hi. So I think, like from my experience of working in sustainability, there are two major challenges that I think are there. One is the infrastructure. So in India, we have been, our industries are not very waste friendly. They are not, they do not know how to construct a green architecture for that matter. So that is the biggest challenge when when you have to make your supply chain also efficient. There are processes that are not there in place. You have to go back and retrain your teams and retrain your machines to do all the work. And the second thing is there is a behavioral shift that is happening. So there is a lot of talks and debates happening these days, but that's a handful of elite people who are talking about it. On the ground level, there are not much work happening in terms of the implementation aspect, because the behavioral pattern of people is still that they want to operate from the past practices. So if you tell a person to you do not use a plastic straw, but drink like that, or go for an eco-friendly straw, they're not doing it. So behavioral education has to come in, behavioral shift has to happen.
Yeah, thank you. I'll take one more. Sure, sure.
I'll just want to kind of flip the question to an internal issue, which I think is more pertinent to ESG, especially the teams. In my reckoning, a typical ESG team would be kind of disconnected from the essential operations of the firm, and hence their agency or the voice they command would be kind of difficult. And in the companies you kind of mentioned, more often than not, either they have a direct reporting to the board, or the board kind of literally kind of back them up, and then hence you find those kind of so-called success stories.
Yeah, thanks. Spot on. And that's it. Somebody else.
Yeah.
So we are currently working on a strategy for one of the construction companies. And what I realize is the suggestions that you make for them to become more sustainable, they are capital intensive in the short run, but they pay off over the long period of time. So that is always a challenge for companies to take up such initiatives.
No, I'm not from a typical internal operations team which actually does any ESG strategy or something. I'm from an organization which trying to find an ESG solution. Enterprise software for ESG, ESG operations. And what I found is that the ESG is basically objectives there. There's an vision out there. When it comes to real practical thing, I'm not getting the details how to do even that. I'm talking from a very layman perspective where I'm just going and reading all this thing. There are so many perspectives for each thing itself. So different standards, all that, it's not united. So it's not unified even. We don't know common language, nothing is there. So even from a system standpoint, we were having trouble to really translate that.
You guys are making our lives really easy. Okay. So we believe that many of you covered these topics already. It's really hard for a company, and especially what you said, sir, those maybe in the medium and small size. Large ones probably are still a little better, as you would expect. They have more resources, more agency, more budgets. But companies are genuinely struggling at two levels. We spoke about all the pressure points they're anyways facing, right? That first struggle they are. But internally, the business strategy doesn't speak to the ESG strategy. They may not have access to board, they may not have the budgets. There's no sort of business doesn't care about it, procurement doesn't care about it, operations doesn't care about it, and they just sort of have very siloed what they do. There is no integration of the value chain itself, like everything from manufacturing to distribution to logistics, the entire way. And there is a very important point in leadership in organization. You touched upon it from a little bit of an agency perspective, also capabilities. And how are you strengthening their capabilities and their sort of support? That's the internal. But like what you spoke about is actually outside in the ecosystem level. Are there policies, are there mandates that are clear, are there standards that are clear, that are helping you understand what to do? Some investors are asking you for it, some investors don't, right? So what should I do, right? Like I probably then just follow, I don't care about those investors, I'll just not do it, right? So, and investors are not creating positive incentives, right? They're also sort of just doing sticks. And the core thing that is really at an ecosystem level is a capacity building and technical assistance, like, the solutioning. You spoke about, like, how there is no methodology on measuring the carbon signal. Like, we need to reduce the cost of MRVs, which is in the agri space, right? It's so hard to understand, what is the carbon footprint, especially when you go back to doing scope 3 emissions. So all of this is what we believe is needed to really make that shift where ESG can start working for the SDGs. And it will take time. But so we're going to now talk a little bit. So let's move on. I'll just cover this very briefly. We see it as a 4-step thing that needs to happen at both company level and ecosystem level. Company level, there is a building of first awareness and understanding of the relevance of ESGs, the link and the impact on stakeholders and the SDGs. You have to create your business case, you have to do your ROIs, you have to understand the climate risk, you have to understand the other sort of risk, you have to do that. Second is the assessment. There's a lot of conversation on materiality assessment. Many of you who do ESG technical work would do this. How do we generally make the shift to double materiality, where you're looking at both inside out and outside in? The ambition itself. And this is where, if you're not connected to the both, your ambition will be low. You don't have the budgets, you don't have the push. How do you actually elevate the conversation? This is important. Set the ambition, set the goals, set the entire sort of theory of change strategy. And then in the action, where it is what, I think ma'am said about like the behavior change, the capacity, but actual, like you need to drive this. It's not that easy. And this is iterative too. You will learn, you will improve. I'm going to hand over to Richa. Richa, talk us through the specific challenges you're seeing and the examples that we've seen. Yeah.
Thank you. So we'll go through this step by step, the 4-step journey of awareness, awareness, assessment, ambition, and action. And when you really think of the categories of challenges, where does a particular challenge fall? Where does your company fall? Where are you finding the biggest roadblock? If you really think about the awareness land, it's among the leadership very often there's a perception of this being a cost center versus a business opportunity. So how do you build that awareness? How do you address that sort of an awareness? There's a perception of compliance, that this is just a compliance thing. There's no linkage of it to my business priorities, so the leadership stays disconnected. Supply chains, marketing, sales teams stay disconnected. If you think of, like Shruti mentioned, double materiality, we don't even have an India level materiality. Let's come to that later. Let me park that aside for now. But if we look at even MSCI or Refinitiv, or we look at the leading rating agencies, how many of us internally have actually done that materiality assessment from not just a compliance standpoint, but from the standpoint of what is the impact, and from a SDG impact standpoint, and what is the financial impact? Very often we get stuck in the loop of project, initiative, implementation, but we don't look at the bigger picture, that how is it impacting the actual business metrics. That kind of loops back into how well will your business teams buy into it. If you look at the ambition, now when you look at business strategy integration, that will not happen without the leadership buy-in. If we look at the business metrics, business metrics integration, that doesn't happen without a proper thorough assessment. If we address those, that's where we look at setting an ambition that is well integrated with business, that is well integrated with SDG impact, that is well planned, and that is more likely to lead to action because it will be driven by the entire organization versus certain fixed departments. This is not exhaustive. I'm sure there's a much longer list, but we've just taken a stab at an initial list just to help you also start framing that where do you currently lie in that journey? What is the biggest issue for you? Is it business strategy integration? Is it your leadership and organizational training? Is it the value chain integration? Are your suppliers responding to that RFP? Are you getting lesser suppliers or more suppliers responding to that RFP? Similarly, can you push your customers that, hey, we are better on our ESG ratings, hence we are better for your business downstream versus just thinking about us. So how do we think of value chain as well? And just to touch on a few examples, I understand bigger organizations, I will actually talk about the smaller ones from this one. if we look at a sugar company called EID Parry, how many of you would know EID Parry? Ah, okay. So EID Parry was in a similar state where the organizational leadership did not buy into the ESG initiatives. It was very siloed. Their first BRSR report was being looked at as compliance. And then the CEO stepped in. The CEO decided, you know what, I've seen this being important and relevant, and I've seen businesses globally shape up. So he built the awareness himself. He built the evidence in his organization, led that transformation, and now they're at a level where not just their overall social initiatives of water positivity in the villages that they are in, of working with the farmers, of working with the women in the villages that they source from, they're also building new businesses. They're building ESG-linked business verticals. They have nutraceuticals, they have millet-based products. So they are step by step transforming their business towards an ESG responsible business versus a sugar mill. And that's a huge transformation. So if you really look at their piecemeal initiatives, it might not seem like a lot. But when you look at the overall ambition and the overall strategy driving that shift, you realize how all those small initiatives really bunch up into that big ambition, how they're driving action on that, and how they're iterating that action over and over. How else can they grow their business? What other products can they launch? How do they train, educate their customers? How do they drive that awareness? So all the decisions gradually then start flowing into an ESG integrated land. Just one example, the others are there for you to see.
Come in one more? Yeah. One other nuance I wanted to bring in was, I have often seen ESG, I'll keep the G aside for a moment anyways, that people do a lot of work on the E side, thinking about climate, circularity, big need to think about biodiversity, etc. But they treat the S as CSR. Right? Actually, a lot of the SDGs sit with integrating E and S together, where you drive climate adaptation for the women smallholder farmers in your value chains, right? Where you drive circularity for those MSMEs in your value chains, right? So I think this is another shift that we are really urging businesses to think about. Don't treat the S as purely labor compliance or CSR, water, gender equity, all of those. Bring it in with what you're doing in the core ESG and think about the specific SDGs that you're trying to impact. Does that resonate? Does that thing? Okay, cool. Back to you, Richa.
Thank you. Just shifting gears now towards the ecosystem level. Of course, as a company, as within our own value chain, within our own sphere of control, there's only so much impact that we will get to if the ecosystem does not push together with us. Somebody mentioned very clear, you mentioned, sir, that you don't know what all is out there. There's so many things out there, they're very confusing. Absolutely. We don't even have an India-specific materiality. So when we talk about where are our biggest gaps for SDGs and how do we integrate it with businesses, with the relevant sectors that can drive the biggest shifts, we don't have that. That's one of those policies, that's one of those transformations that we need to drive together with policymakers. When we talk about investor linkages, like Shruti mentioned, you'll go to the one who is not talking about ESG because there are many of those. So how are we seeing those guidelines shape up? How is there a mandate that can be driven for the financial sector to disclose their ESG investments, similar to what UK has done, similar to what EU has done? And then along with all of that, how do you drive policies, capacity building? How do you drive that awareness throughout the system so that it's not just your top organization, their organizational teams, or it's not just the ESG teams, it's everybody who understands these matrices. They understand the linkage to business, they understand the linkage to SDGs, and the initiative then moves, the ambition then moves together for the country. Just a couple of examples and good practices, and I'm sure all of you are well aware of these regulations. CBAM did not just come about. CBAM came about very well integrated with ETS, with EU ETS framework, which came in very well integrated with the net zero commitments from EU. So the intent behind the policy was well thought out. We all might already know what's happening on the implementation in India, but hopefully the intent will be better understood and accelerate decarbonization action. Similarly, we see financial sector disclosure mandates coming up in UK and EU, which is now accelerating ESG investments in those countries. As soon as that comes into India, and that's something that works in India as well, this will actually drive a significant shift as well. Just want to leave you with one last thought, that as we do raise our ambition, we do need to watch out for a few pitfalls. The temptation is very strong, and there have been cases and examples of companies who've gotten tempted, set a goal too high, not understood the feasibility aspect of those goals, and kind of fell flat. I'm sure if I ask in the room here for examples, a few names will come to mind. Does anybody want to share one name or the other that comes to mind before I share some? No? Does H&M ring a bell? So H&M, with their clothes recycling initiative in India, in a country where the value chain does not exist, where people are bringing back fabrics, mixed blended fabrics, which cannot be recycled. And then they eventually ended up sending them to another country to just incinerate. So let's not be H&Ms. Let's be Patagonias. That's what I want to end with. Thank you.
Thank you, Richa. I hope the energy went up a little. Okay. Yeah, happy to take questions and also reflections as you went through this. A little bit of a reflective session, please. Yeah. Sorry, I'm going to pass you the mic.
If we could have this, whatever you have put, it shared across, we could. Yeah. Yeah, there were a few points which we were all trying to capture as pictures, but that might not come well. But yeah, thank you again. Some more, maybe when you share it across, a few action points that could be easily either implemented or something that the company which is at the initial level to follow. So the 2 points that resonated was around, it's scattered, it's vast. Like we come to take from CSR, we take up ESG, then where do we get stuck is thinking only about the CSR angle. Okay, we are not even touching anything on the governance level because that's all defined. We don't pitch into that. But on the E and S part, we are also looking from an angle of community more than what is actually the E and S. And the S also falls for our employees' well-being. The S also falls under the DNI. So that aspect is somewhere missing. Some action points that could be shared from your side of what people have already done that could be easily taken would help. But yeah, thank you.
You know the 4 A's that we showed, the awareness, assessment, ambition and action. I would say companies which are at this transition, I'm doing CSR work, I'm not going to do ESG, I'm still sort of, either chasing the S part of it, like the way you framed it. 2 things that you can start thinking about. See, ESG is your business money, right? So you're not restricted by CSR laws, norms. Sorry, no disrespect to CSR, right? It is good. It is good money being spent on good work. Start thinking about all stakeholders in your value chain. Right? I think like the gentleman is not here right now. Oh, you were there. Yeah, you spoke about it, right? Start from who your suppliers are, who your vendors are, who your workers are, your employees, your customers. Within them, and of course community is also a stakeholder, it gives you a license to operate. Think about how your ESG efforts can improve their lives, right? Whether it's about creating access to clean drinking water, right? Whether it's about sort of, building income for women suppliers or thing. That's one shift. It's not hard. You need to just strategically think about all stakeholders. That's one, right? Go on. Can I complete my point? Yeah, thank you. The second one that I was going to say is, in terms of action is, you need to assess what are the risks, the awareness part that your business faces. Right? At the end, again, ESG is business money. Somebody asked, you said ROI. You have to prove ROI. A CFO is not going to give you money unless you show there is ROI. So go in assessing And you may not be able to do complicated climate risk assessments, which take like tons of money, but you know your business risks, right? With your operations team, production team, manufacturing, you know your business risks. If you take those and then think about, if I did this, what is the return in my business and what is the return on my stakeholders, you would have connected business. It's not very tactical, but I'm saying that two shifts can help you.
I would just add one line to that. You're already good at doing CSR. You're already good at doing CSR. All you need to do is shift your mindset to thinking that now your own company is also your stakeholder. And the answers, I'm sure, will flow in the journey then.
Ma'am, my question is that on a global level, is there some sort of a logo or a brand or some sort of a mark which an ESG compliant company is using to convey to its customers that, hey, we are an ESG compliant company, and hence you buy a product and hence we get more business, because as ma'am said, ESG is business money being spent, right?
There are too many. But and it's about which part of E or S you want to communicate. But there are quite a few. And it's also about who you're communicating it to. If you're talking to investors, you talk about ESG scores, your ESG ratings from MSCI, Refinitiv, etc. But when you're talking to consumers, like you mentioned, there's a very interesting sustainable label guideline that's coming up in EU. I would recommend going through that guideline. It's exactly what you said. It's an integrated guideline which talks about, you will find out everything about the company through just that QR code scan on their responsible practices, fair trade practices, S, E, everything.
But I have to add something to it. I don't think there's, I still believe the one stakeholder who's not willing to pay you anything more is your customer. No, I'm just generally, yeah.
No, just communicating. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, agreed. You might get your volumes, but still the market is very nascent. What you will do is fundamentally improve your yields, your revenue, your cost, reduce your cost, by making your business more resilient, and also by including more stakeholders. But just being mindful of that, right? Like many businesses are chasing these, we'll do these certifications, we'll do these practices, and we'll get a higher price. Not seeing that yet.
You mean the labeling guidelines? None. No. So in India, sadly, when you talk about consumer-focused sector, other than a slight premium for organic foods, we are not seeing much of a premium for anything else right now. Sorry for the disappointing answer. You won't get a premium, and the fair trade, the reliance and the question marks on that are still being raised. So. You won't get a premium, sadly. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting. GOTS is not getting much of a premium right now. Only for the organic part they were getting it, but not for fair trade.
My question is, some of the right resources to study, but could be some of the right resources to study more about ESG. So on internet, if you Google, there is a lot of information, but there's also a lot of misinformation, right? So I have been working it. So obviously one is the SEBI, SEBI website, and go there and check the amendments, and then get be updated on the BRSR reporting format and everything. But apart from that, if you know some good websites or some right resources, it would be helpful.
I think the three that are go-to for me are the global rating agencies. SEBI, the CRISIL guidelines, the SEBI guidelines, and BRSR guidelines are inspired from those. I would look at MSCI. They actually have training courses on their website. MSCI, then there's Refinitiv, which I think is renamed now to LSEG, is the London Stock Exchange one. And there's Sustainalytics. So, there we go. So these three are the biggest across E, S, and G. When you want to double-click more on just E, there is also CDP. CDP, Carbon Disclosure Project. They also now have a PDP, Plastic Disclosure Project, but that's separate. But these four, globally, for me, have been like a very good lens to check what's actually good, not good. You'll see global materiality maps and everything there. So it's a very good crash course.
Thank you.
MSCI, Refinitiv is now LSEG, London Stock Exchange something, the G I'm forgetting. Then there's Sustainalytics, so sustain of sustainability, and analytics has combined into Sustainalytics. They've done a Hindi Sandhi instead of English. And there's CDP, Carbon Disclosure Project.
I'm just doing a time check. Are we at time?
Yeah, we are done.
That's what I thought, thank you for engaging. Thank you for engaging very actively. I thoroughly actually enjoyed the session. Found it, I learned a lot too from your questions. We will share this presentation. Feel free to reach out as you sort of are thinking about these. Like I said, this is a pretty new direction. I generally believe in ESG is pretty new in our country so far. We are trying to push it even more. So if you have questions, if you want to do a brainstorm or so, feel free to reach out. Yeah, cool. Thank you.